Hello, guys, gals, non-binary pals. Welcome back. They're back. Yes, that's me. Due to extenuating circumstances of the year of 2020, I have not filmed a video in over 6 months. Here we are. I have actually not had anything to film about for the last 5 months because I've barely read anything the first half of this year. I got big into RPGs, especially Dimension 20. I'll link that down below just because you should all check it out. It's an amazing actual play RPG show. Lots of personal stuff going on that has made it difficult for me to have the mental space to film, but I finally read stuff in May. I read half of all the books I read this year. I read in the past month. And to sort of help myself along with having stuff to read and prompts to kind of kick me in the butt and get me reading again, I participated in a readathon. I think this was my first readathon, definitely the first I've talked about on this channel, and I participated in the SeaMAYdenathon run by Fangirl Pixie Blog, and I'll link to the information on the readathon down below. I also wanted to point out I painted my nails with mermaid themed nail polish, just for this. And I covered it up, but I'm wearing my Mermaid in Love with an Angel shirt. I wore this all the time in high school and it's now like thin as tissue paper. And we're gonna just cover it back up. This is my stuffed hedgehog Barbara McClintock. She's named after my favorite geneticist, as you do. I read 15 books this month. Some of them fit a prompt for the readathon, some did not. I want to go through them in chronological order and talk about how they applied to the prompts for SeaMAYdenathon. The first book I read, and I can't believe I read this at the beginning of May, was The Downstairs Girl by Stacey Lee. This is about a Chinese American woman who is living underneath the House of Abolitionists because Chinese people are not allowed to rent property at the time that this book was written in the late 1800s. And she works as a maid in a house and has also been in her spare time, her limited spare time that she has, been writing as an advice columnist for the newspaper that is printed out of the house that she lives underneath. She lives with a man who is her caretaker, who is the stable master for the house that she works at. And I read this for the Own Voices prompt. So Stacey Lee's a Chinese woman, and the main character of her book and another book that I read later this month are Chinese. I'm really glad that I bought this book. Made me tear up at some points just because the ending was so sweet. Yeah, this was great. Next was The Strange Worlds Travel Agency by L.D. Lipinski. I think I found this through Jessica Townsend's Twitter. Jessica Townsend is the writer of one of my favorite series, Wondersmith, and it's great that she recommended this to me because, not to me personally, but because I was looking for a read-alike for Wondersmith for a whimsical middle grade fantasy. You know, we all just need some whimsy in our lives right now. Yeah. So anyway, The Strange Worlds Travel Agency is about a young woman who discovers a travel agency storefront in the town that she's just moved to. The boy working there reveals to her that he is the leader of a travel agency. People travel by stepping into suitcases. It's wonderful. There are many parallel worlds that they travel to. It was very whimsical and fun. In May, for some reason, I read a lot of books like in one day. I think this was a in one day book for me. It almost but not quite fell into the trap that is a big pet peeve of mine of, oh, this story's all about parallel universes, but we're gonna go to one for most of the book and stick to it. You've wasted your premise, my friend. But this one, it sort of did that, but it also used all the parallel worlds in a really clever way, so I appreciated that. Also, I wish this was more explicit in the book. I caught on to it right away, but young readers might not. The young man, who's one of the POV characters, is trans, which the author confirmed on Twitter and will, I'm sure, be explored in later books. So there's that representation in there. And this didn't apply to a readathon prompt. Next was Wonder Woman by Sam Maggs. This is one of the many books I've read that has multiple short biographies of wonderful women across history, and I've managed to flip to 100% of pages that do not have any illustrations. Hey, there we go. Look at that badass. So like a lot of the other books that I've read and the books I talked about in my Lady Scientist video, This just had a bunch of short biographies, basically for YA audiences. YA audiences, I need to drink some water, talking about incredible women. And it was divided up in a really interesting way, I thought, between women of science, medicine, espionage, innovation, and adventure. So it really covered a wide breadth of people, and I learned about so many cool lady spies. That also did not apply to a readathon prompt. Next, I read Mycroft Holmes by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Anna Waterhouse. I picked this up not only because it's a Sherlock Holmes pastiche, but also because it's written by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who is a wonderful author. I know him best as an author. Everyone else probably knows him best as a really tall, famous basketball player, but I've read a few of his articles. I read his nonfiction book about the All-African-American Tank Battalion in World War II, so this is the second book by him that I've read. The main character is Sherlock Holmes' older brother, Mycroft Holmes. Oh, and really cool thing, the kind of Watson character is a black man from the Caribbean. I definitely, going into it, had the assumption, which I felt like was justified, that it was all going to be told from the point of view, like the first person point of view of the black Watson character, and then it was like mostly from Mycroft's point of view, and I was like, I literally don't want this. And Mycroft was like this action guy, he's like 23 or something. I mean, you all may know I have a thing about Sherlock Holmes book adaptations and I hold them to a very high standard. The language in this was great, could find no fault there. It was mostly set in the Caribbean, they were Chinese characters, which was really cool to see, but I just, like, I would have been perfectly content if none of it was from Mycroft's point of view. Don't care about Mycroft, really. I mean, I don't know if this book did a good job making me care about Mycroft. Maybe care about his friend, who's the black guy, whose name is Cyrus. He was great. Loved him. And then, yeah, I fully went into it like, oh yeah, he's the Watson, and it's all going to be from his point of view and about Mycroft. That's just not what happened. And also, Sherlock was in it briefly, and he was his canon age, so he was still a teenager, which is really neat because not everyone gets that right, but he was, like, really misogynistic, which I guess it was like, oh, he hadn't gone through his Irene Adler thing yet, and he hadn't drank all his Respect Women juice yet, but, like, Mycroft would hear Sherlock's voice in his head being like, oh, you're so dumb. It's like, okay, let's all just leave Sherlock alone. But anyway, that was a book that I read, and I don't think I used that for any of the prompts. Next was book 1 of the webcomic Strong Female Protagonist by Brennan Lee Mulligan and Molly Ostertag. Brennan Lee Mulligan is the Dungeon Master of Dimension 20, the show that I was raving about earlier. I'm going to do a whole video about book read-alikes for the Dimension 20 shows, but anyway, Brennan Lee Mulligan is the best DM on the planet. Critical Role fans, at me. And Molly Ostertag is a graphic novelist who wrote The Witch Boy and the Witch Boy series and also works on the show Owl House. Anyway, they're longtime friends, and this is the first collected edition of the webcomic that they've done together. It's about a former superhero. She's 19 and in college, and the whole webcomic is exploring what happens after she decides to renounce her powers and just become an ordinary person, and how lots of, you know, former supervillains are angry about that, and also her former team members, and just kind of exploring what it means for her to have all this power that she didn't ask for, and yet no one can really control her, and her both anger and yet trying to do the right thing. So a lot of interesting, like, morality superhero stuff. Next, I didn't know about this book until like a week after it came out, and I can't believe it because it's another Penrick and Desdemona novella by Lois McMaster Bujold. If you recall, which you may not, I read this whole series in like a week last summer. This is the next book in the series, and it's about a plague. Which of course Lois couldn't have known when she was writing it, you know, several months ago. But yeah, it's about curing a plague, so that was the thing that I read. Not that it was bad, but it was just like, and like it was cathartic to see Penrick like figure out how to solve it. And it was just like localized to his community. So you may not have the headspace to read that right now. But if you're a Penrick and Desdemona and a Lois McMaster Bujold fan, I had a cocktail before this. Unrelated. That's the next book, and I, you know, don't skip it. Next was Come Tumbling Down by Shauna McGuire. This is the fifth book in the Wayward Children series. I think this is my least favorite one. Yeah, there were a lot. It's very short. There were a lot of characters, and I felt like I didn't use them all very well. But my friend Shirley loaned me this copy, and so I counted it for the read a book recommended by a friend prompt. I don't really want to talk about it. I didn't enjoy it very much. That's okay. Next, I just reach for it like I own it, but it's on digital. Slippery Creatures by KJ Charles. This was a gay romance set post-World War I in London. I definitely thought based on the cover that one of the main characters was Asian, but he wasn't, so it's just two white guys, and that's fine. It was like a fine mystery. Oh, I mean, it's told entirely from the perspective of one of the characters, which is always cool to see in romance because, you know, a lot of the times it's told from the perspective of the two people in the relationship. Sometimes I haven't read any polyamorous romance novels, but I would imagine that those are told from the perspective of all of the participants. But anyway, this one was told just from the main character's perspective, which made a lot of sense because there were some twists and turns related to the love interest that would have been revealed had we known. Yeah, it was just a KJ Charles, like, I picked it up because I thought that one of the characters was a man of color, but he wasn't. There was a great black female character who I am betting is going to get her own sapphic romance later, which is really cool to see. I read that for a beach read entirely because I read it on the beach. And you can't get more beach read than that. Next was, This Light Between Us by Andrew Fukuda. This was a very difficult novel to read. I mean, I couldn't put it down, but it was also, like, extremely emotional. I read this for the tearjerker prompt, which may tell you a little bit about it. This novel is about a Japanese-American boy who is uprooted from his family home in Bainbridge Island in my state, along with his parents and brother, and taken to a concentration camp where Japanese Americans were sent in World War II. I will link down below to some references to calling them concentration camps versus other terms, and you can read those at your leisure. Other people have talked about it better than I can. But anyway, he's sent to Manzanar, and if you know anything about Japanese American internment, you'll know that Manzanar was the site of a massacre that happened when a protest broke out from the people living there versus the guards. The main character, Charlie, then joins the 441st All Japanese American Battalion and goes through all of that. On top of all this, he has had a pen pal since he was 10. Oh my god, no. His friend's name is Charlie. I'm so sorry. Alex has a Jewish French pen pal named Charlie, who he loses contact with partway through the war because she's sent to a concentration camp in Europe. She's actually sent to Dachau and then Auschwitz. He partially joins the army to try and find her if he's able to. Just know going in, this book is super sad. It's brutal, but it's the kind of brutal where not only is it sad, it's also forcing you to confront the racism against Asian Americans that happened in this country and continues to happen in light of Asian Americans and Chinese American communities being targeted during COVID-19. Unforgettable book. You simply must read it. I know I read a lot of World War II books. I try and concentrate on books being written by and about women and people of color in World War II, so I can't recommend this book enough. Definitely check it out, and it just came out earlier this year and hasn't gotten a lot of hype. Next, I read The True Queen by Zen Cho. I read this for the sapphic romance prompt. The romance is, it could have been a little more overt, but it was very like subtle and slow burn, which is really nice. The main character is a young Malaysian woman who has a twin sister, and they wash up on the shores of a Malaysian island with no memory of how they got there. They just know that they're sisters. In hopes that their memory loss will be cured, they're sent by this formidable witch woman, Mat Gengag, to London, where I should have said I'm not on my game tonight. This is the second book in the Sorcerer to the Crown series, so this is the first book. It has a terrible cover, but it's written by a Malaysian woman, and it's a Regency fantasy romance. The main characters of The True Queen go to fairyland, and one of the sisters is magical. They're spending part of their time at a witch school, which was established between the first and the second book Not a lot happens in this book, which is really weird because, like, it feels like it should be this kind of, like, action-packed adventure. It's more of just, like, a manners punk. And I feel like not a lot happened, and I totally called the twist from, like, the first page. But that's fine. It was an enjoyable read. Next was the book that I read for the group read. I didn't actually sign up for this readathon in time, so none of my points counted, but I was counting them for myself. And everyone was divided into teams based on which kind of mermaid-themed book they read. So I read The Deep by River Solomon. This is a book based on a song written by the group Clipping. David Diggs is part of them, and that song was actually nominated for a Hugo last year in the, I think, multimedia category. Anyway, this is a novella based on that song, and it is about how the descendants of pregnant women tossed from slave ships during the mid-Atlantic crossing became mermaids, essentially. It's, wow, it really gets into the ideas of cultural memory in a big way, and kind of the burden of knowing your people's past and history in ways that I, as a white person, can't fully comprehend, but I was able to get a glimpse of it through this book. It's a novella. Like all good novellas, it packs a lot of ideas into a short amount of time. River Solomon is a black non-binary author, and this has a sapphic romance in it, so please support them and check out this book. Next was The Book of Delights by Ross Gay, and oh boy, was it a book of delights. I've been meaning to buy this book ever since I read an excerpt of it online, and it was well worth it. This is a book as a sort of project that Ross Gay did, where he wrote an essay every day for a year about things that delighted him. And much like a good Simpsons or Futurama episode, they start out one way and then end up somewhere totally unexpected, talk about race and poetry and his family, and it was just a really beautiful book. One of those ones that I read in one day, and I'm definitely been inspired to check out Ross Gay's poetry now. The way that he writes some of his essays are kind of like prose poems, and that they're extremely lyrical and have multiple commas per sentence, if you know what I mean. Shout out to all my creative writing majors. Next was Darius the Great is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. This was an absolutely fantastic book. I also read this in one day, had a lot of that happening this month. This is about a half-Iranian boy who goes with his family to Iran. He's going for the first time, and so is his sister, to visit his family, most of whom he's never met in person before. And he struggles with depression, as does his dad, and he's on medication for it and is going through therapy. And so the book is about mental health, and also just about family in an absolutely beautiful and heartbreaking way. Because of aforementioned family stuff, I definitely cried a lot during this book, just in kind of a cathartic way. It is, sad, but also really beautiful and uplifting. And it also talks about what it means to be mixed race, and kind of exploring male intimacy outside of romantic relationships, and kind of male intimacy in other cultures through friendships. And I absolutely loved it, and the next book is coming out soon. Darius the Great Deserves Better, and I can't wait to read it. I just adored it. Definitely going to be trying to check out more Middle Eastern authors this year. Next, a book that I read for a book that has been on my TBR for a long time prompt was The Steerswoman by Rosemary Christine. I picked this up because it had been recommended to me as a book in a world where sexism didn't exist, which I always love to see. It's been a video idea of mine for a while to do a video all about ranking the tiers of sexism in fantasy worlds, and I would put this in the tier of equality. Sexism doesn't exist, except in, ways that an 80s author wasn't able to fully, articulate, but from an outsider's perspective, men and women are treated fairly equally. Anyway, it's written in a very, comforting, female 80s fantasy author style. I didn't notice until, halfway through the book that there's, a computer on the cover. I mean, it's a major plot point, but I just did not look at that corner of the cover in the 3 years that I've owned this book. It would also qualify for my 20th century femme, sci-fi, and fantasy, but it was just kind of a meh book. The lack of sexism was cool to see, and it had a really interesting world premise, but it was kind of forgettable. The last book that I read this month was Under a Painted Sky, also by Stacey Lee. It is about a Chinese American woman who is escaping a murder charge and a black woman who is escaping slavery who go west together. One of them to look for her brother, the other one to search for a man that her father entrusted with her mother's last possession. She's trying to find him and get her mother's bracelet back. And they fall in with a group of young men, one of whom is Mexican, and who they're trying to hide the fact that they've disguised themselves as boys, because of course it's a lot safer to be on the Oregon Trail if you're a man, and especially a white man. Chock full of female friendship. The romance was but it really scratched that itch you get every now and then, or at least I get every now and then, where I'm like, I just really want to read a Western, you know, and it's hard to find a Western that's not just a bunch of guys. Yeah, that was great. I'm feeling the very like Greta Gerwig Little Women women gif. Like I just want to read about and watch stuff about women right now. I ended up reading 2 Stacey Lee books in 1 month. Really scratches that people of color in historical fiction itch, where it doesn't shy away from racism but also shows people of color going on adventures in history, which is wonderful to see. My first readathon, I think, was a rousing success. Definitely got me out of my book slump, which I was fine to be in because I was super into RPGs earlier this year. Don't regret giving myself kind of a lighter book reading goal for this year, but I definitely hope to read books by people of color more this year. It's been a really wild time the past few days, and if you can, please consider donating to Black Lives Matter groups in your community. Help with cash bail funds, donate to George Floyd's family's memorial fund on GoFundMe. I will link all of these down below. Sign petitions, call your reps. We need to do all that we can to support Black and brown people in our communities. And if one of those things is buying books by people of color, then awesome. That's what I went out and did this weekend. That is all that I have. Hopefully it won't be too long before my next video. Maybe someday I'll film that Lady Pilots video I keep talking about. Alright, that is all for me. I hope you all are staying safe and that your families and friends are safe. And if you're out protesting, thank you. And please be safe. That is where I will leave you all. Bye.